Hi everyone, my name's Mark Sibbald from Fleet Auto News. If you're watching this video, it means I didn't make it to the conference in person, or you could just be catching up to see what you missed. My session is called When the Rubber Hits the Road. It's a nice play on words for a presentation on tyres, and I'm going to share a few ideas to get you thinking about those round black things that help your fleet vehicle stop, steer and get moving. Essentially, that's the main job of a tyre. It's designed to hold the weight of the vehicle using rubber, steel and air. However, the three things that tyres do without most people knowing are provide grip to stop the car, provide a connection with the road when you turn the steering wheel, and provide traction when your right foot pushes down on the accelerator. Just think about motor racing for a second. You don't have to be a fan to know that they use different tyres for dry conditions and a different tyre for when it's raining. They also have different rubber compounds, hard, medium and soft, depending on the track conditions. Each tyre is designed to propel the race car around the track in the fastest possible time. For fleet vehicles, one tyre needs to do all those things and perform in dry weather, wet weather, under different load conditions, and with drivers who think they could be Lewis Hamilton given half the chance. Before I get into the details, my presentation comes with a warning. I'm a tyre nerd. I spent the last 10 years working for Bridgestone and Hankook, selling tyres to customers and training tyre retailers on the features and benefits of these round bits of rubber with a hole in the middle. So I may get a little too passionate. I may get a little too technical and maybe a little too boring for some of you. But if you're watching this recording, you can just fast forward. Or if you're in the sessions at the conference, you may nod off a little bit, but that's okay. That can be a signal. I'll keep an eye out, and if I see anyone nodding off, I'll talk a bit faster, talk a bit louder, or even move on to the next slide. But that's what nerds tend to do, people who are passionate about a topic. We tend to talk too much, but that's okay. You're here to learn, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the presentation. Open with my top 5 tips for managing your tyres. This is what you came for, right? To get some tips on how to reduce your maintenance budget. Many fleet managers focus on the big things and never spend time looking at the boring expenses like tyres. It would be fair to say that tyres don't get many people excited. So write down these 5 things now. And when you get back to work and look over your notes, hopefully, 1 or 2 of them will give you some tips on how to reduce your maintenance budget. I've also created a visual slide to explain the tips because we all learn differently. Tip number 1, which I think my head's hiding the number there, the tyre treads you can see. So tip number 1 is to train your drivers to check their tyre pressures monthly. How? Well, I'm not really sure. I'm the tyre guy. There's probably a session on motivating and managing staff in the rest of the program. All jokes aside, it's hard to develop the behaviours in the drivers. However, there's lots of other things vehicle custodians should be checking on a regular basis, so I'm sure you've already got some systems in place. Technology can help as well. For example, tyre pressure monitoring systems, or TPMS for short, will tell the driver when a tyre has lost pressure. So when evaluating new vehicle purchases, maybe you can look in the options list, and if you can pick a vehicle with TPMS, it could help avoid a breakdown and save thousands of dollars by alerting the driver that the pressure has been lost from the tyre. There are also some aftermarket options available as well. Working in the tyre industry for the last 10 years, I've learned that if you maintain your tyre pressures, tyres will last forever. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's always variations to the rule. But hands down, in a like-for-like comparison, if a vehicle with regular tyre pressure maintenance compared to a vehicle that doesn't get its tyres checked at all, the tyres will last longer and you will get more value for money from the tyres. One real-life example that I've come across is a fleet based in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. The company is called UEM Ingenta. They are the region's leading asset management company, and they provide infrastructure solutions, healthcare support, property and facility management. They implemented a tyre pressure monitoring solution, or tyre pressure monitoring system, as part of the safety program back in 2019. Within the first 12 months, they captured savings of $24,833. Now that's a significant saving across a fleet in 1 year. Tip number 2. Using the spare tyre isn't something everyone can do, because some vehicles now come with space savers or other non-spare type options. So it will depend on the type of fleet. But if you have a full-size spare in your vehicles, this tip alone can save you 25% on your tyre and maintenance budget. How? Well, it's simple maths. If you need to replace 4 tyres during the life of the vehicle on your fleet, you will only need to buy 3, because you can use the spare tyre. And if you're doing regular maintenance, the tyres won't be completely worn. So you can put a roadworthy spare in the boot in case of emergencies. And having a full-size spare that's brand new doesn't really offer any extra value when you sell the car, because most people don't check. Tip number 3, replacing with OE fitments. What does this mean? Like for like is what most fleets call it. So whatever the vehicle comes from the factory, whatever brand of tyre, replacing it with the same one. This provides benefits in several ways. The first benefit is safety and performance. You went to a lot of effort to select this car for your fleet, a lot of evaluations and looking at a lot of data. So if you want it to perform the way the manufacturer designed it, you need to put the same tyres back on it. And manufacturers have spent a lot of time picking the correct tyre for the vehicle. And in some situations, they actually pick the correct tyre for the country, depending on the conditions. And Australia is unique compared to other places in the world, especially the Northern Hemisphere. The second reason to stick with OE tyres becomes obvious when a tyre gets damaged. It's easier to replace one when they're all the same, of a popular brand and pattern. Once you start changing to different patterns, it may force you to pay for two tyres when you only need to replace one to keep the same patterns on the front or rear axle. This then leads me to my next tip, selecting the right supplier. Tyre retailers do not carry every brand of tyre. They can access every brand easily, though if it's not their preferred brand, it will potentially cause friction between the driver and the fleet when the retailer offers a brand and says you can do it today, but it may not be the brand that's on the car. For example, if your preferred ute is a Ford Ranger and they come with Dunlop tyres, choosing Bridgestone as your tyre supplier will not deliver the best price and service levels. You should probably be thinking about talking to a retailer that has Dunlop as their main brand. The same theory applies if your main vehicles have Bridgestone as the OE fitment. You should probably be talking to Bridgestone to make sure that your drivers go to a retailer which will have the tyres in stock when you need them. And finally, you should include all of these tips in your fleet policy. Most fleet policies don't go into the detail of tyres. They broadly cover repairs and servicing, which leaves maintenance and tyre replacement open to interpretation, which that means driver's choice, and we all know how that ends up. You could also look at including in your policy the other 2 tips I mentioned for purchasing vehicles. Looking at TPMS as a requirement for vehicles that you buy, and also making sure the vehicle comes with a spare tyre if there's an option in it. You can work out cheaper to buy it up front and use it during your tyre maintenance plan to replace it and save the cost of purchasing a new tyre. If the rules are clearly spelled out in the policy, it makes it easier for everybody and will reduce the friction between the fleet department and the rest of the business. Okay, let's think about tyre technology. And let's be honest, tyres have an image problem. The current generation looks like the first generation from over 100 years ago. Imagine if the iPhone still looked the same as when it was launched in 2007. No one would be lining up for the latest one, I can tell you that. However, every generation of tyre that is launched, the technological improvements could be compared to electronics. Unfortunately, you can't see the difference, and most people can't tell the difference when they're driving. There are three main parts of a tyre, and this is where the improvements are made. One we can see, the other two are hard to spot unless you're a tyre nerd like me. The three parts are 1, the tread, 2, the compound, and 3, the construction. The tyre tread is what we all see, and it's how we know when it's time to replace the tyres. However, every line and every groove in the tread has a job to do, and the pattern in the tread also dictates the tyre application. For example, in passenger tyres, there are UHP and HP tread designs. HP means high performance, and guess what UHP means? Ultra high performance. They're pretty original with the naming as well. In simple terms, HP is for fleet cars, and UHP would be for maybe a novated lease or a benefit car. That's a guide only. You can also use a vehicle purchase price as a guide. Normally, cars under 50k would come with a HP tyre, and cars over 50k would come with the UHP tyre. So that gives you an indication. SUVs work on a similar theory, though the tyres for fleet cars are called HT, which stands for highway terrain. The biggest leap in tread patterns through tread technology relevant to fleet vehicles is the improvements in all-terrain tyres for utes and four-wheel drive vehicles. They are now very quiet and provide good performance in wet weather if you pick the right one. And the great news for fleets is the price point between a highway terrain tyre and an all-terrain tyre is similar compared to 10 years ago when there was a big difference in price. A word of caution though, not all terrain tyres are the same. There are different tread patterns, and some are designed for off-road use, maybe 80-20, 80% off-road, 20% on, and the other ones, which are more relevant to fleet vehicles, are designed for 80% on-road use and 20% off. Okay, so here's two images of popular all-terrain tyres being sold in Australia. The tread design for the one on the left is optimised for low noise, great performance on the road in wet and dry conditions. If I point out a few of the features, it has a strong centre rib which provides stability at speed. There are 4 main channels running around the tyre which are designed to evacuate the water quickly and provide good wet weather performance. And the off-road performance comes from different angles on each tread block. These are called biting edges and provide the traction in the dirt, the sand and the mud. The one on the right is a great tyre, but it's designed for off-road performance. It's the most desired all-terrain pattern in Australia, and 4x4 enthusiasts often ask for it by name when replacing their tyres. It's a tyre that younger buyers aspire to, and they'll save their pennies so they can afford it. It's also a brand that fleet drivers will want on their car. The issue for fleet managers is the one on the left is cheaper than the one on the right. And the one on the left performs better in on-road conditions, which is where most fleet vehicles spend their time. So you can see how fitting all-terrain tyres can provide a benefit, but they can also increase your costs if you're paying $20 or $30 per tyre extra across the fleet because the drivers want the one that's the most popular in the market. The other two parts of a tyre that you can't see are the rubber compound and the construction of the tyre. Just because they're all black doesn't mean the rubber is the same. There are 2 main components that affect the performance and wear life of a tyre. They are silica and carbon black, and this image here tries to give you an idea of the different benefits. A high silica compound tyre is used in a high-performance passenger tyres and provides wet weather grip. Generally UHP tyres that I mentioned before, ultra high performance. A high carbon black tyre compound is used to increase mileage and durability. Now, it's cheaper to make a tyre using carbon black than it is to make a tyre using silica. So a lot of the cheaper brands that may look the same, they're still black and round with a hole in the middle, they'll be using more carbon black compared to the well-known brands that will be using the latest technology for their compounds, including silica and other components. Unfortunately, the two components don't work well together, and tyre manufacturers are constantly trying to improve the balance to achieve good performance in the wet, longer mileage and durability. This image simplifies the challenge tyre manufacturers face to highlight the difference between the two components. The green line shows the benefits of a silica-based compound, and the black line shows the benefits of a carbon-based compound. It's always a compromise, and the changes in technology over the years means tyres are now safer. They've increased their resistance to wear, and they're better in wet weather conditions. The detail will become more relevant when we start talking about EV tyres. Tyre construction is also changing as well. The basic principles remain the same, however the components are always being tweaked and new raw materials are being introduced. Here's two examples of technology over the last 10 or 20 years. The first one on the right is a run flat tyre. The second one on the left, there's a couple of tyres stacked on top of each other, and these tyres have sound absorbers, which is foam fitted inside the tyre to reduce the tyre noise. Run flat tyres allow the car to be driven when the tyre loses pressure. This requires the tyres to be designed and constructed differently to normal tyres so they can hold the weight of the vehicle without any air. Unfortunately, this technology has not been adopted by many manufacturers, with BMW and Mercedes being the main users. Sound absorbers reduce the road and tyre noise to improve the ride quality and comfort for the passengers. This simple solution is finding its way into many luxury brands and is becoming popular with electric cars because there is no engine noise, and they're looking to reduce all noise as much as possible to improve the ride comfort for the passengers. Another emerging trend is OE markings on tyres. More and more manufacturers are adopting this concept to ensure the quality and comfort of the products they are producing. BMW is famous for this and uses a star on the tyre sidewall to identify tyres that are suitable to be fitted. They even suggest that elements of a vehicle's warranty could be voided if the incorrect tyres have been fitted. Tyre manufacturers will make the same size and pattern of tyre without the OE markings. Sometimes they'll even make the same size and pattern for different manufacturers, which will have different OE markings. So when retailers don't understand the importance of OE tyre markings, they may fit a generic tyre, or, which is quite common, they'll fit a Mercedes tyre to a BMW or a BMW tyre to a Mercedes. They may look round and black, but the vehicle and tyre manufacturers create these OE markings for a reason. And the reason becomes more obvious and more important for fleet managers when we start talking about tyres for EVs. Okay, the tyre you can see here is fitted to the Hyundai Ioniq 5. It's a tyre designed for an electric vehicle. It is obvious because of the pattern name. You can see it says Pilot Sport EV, and the OE marking on the sidewall, which is GOE, just below the checkered flag there. Electric vehicles don't have engine noise, so the only sound you'll hear inside the cabin is the tyres on the road. So when designing EV tyres, the goal is to reduce as much noise as possible with sophisticated tread designs and low noise rubber compounds. Supporting the vehicle load is one of the basic roles performed by a tyre. They also deliver power from the drivetrain to the road for acceleration and absorb the forces when the brakes are applied. Each of these functions is different with a heavy electric vehicle that delivers more torque to the wheels. The tyres need to be stronger for EVs. They need to carry more load and handle greater forces when accelerating, braking and turning corners. If tyres designed for petrol and diesel-powered cars are fitted to an EV, they'll impact on the vehicle's safe operation, wear out quicker, and will increase the running costs for a fleet manager. Low rolling resistance compounds were introduced more than a decade ago to help vehicle manufacturers reduce fuel consumption. The push to improve the rolling resistance was driven by strict rules in Europe that taxed vehicle manufacturers on their average CO2 emissions for all vehicles they produced if it was above a certain target. Now with electric vehicles, the goal is to get the longest range from the smallest amount of energy, and tyres play an important role in achieving this. So how do you use all of the information I've just shared with you? Unless you're a tyre nerd or planning to attend an automotive trivia night, it may not be very useful at all. What about when you're selecting a tyre supplier or working with your existing tyre supplier? Let's look at some tips on working with them and using some of the information I've just shared to get the most out of the relationship. As we know, suppliers can't be all things to all people. They have their strengths and their weaknesses, and a lot depends on the people and processes within the business. And sometimes they may not be the right fit for your fleet. So how do you know if a tyre supplier is the right fit for your fleet? Well, like most things in life, you'll need to decide what you need, what your needs are. Then you'll also need to decide what you want or what your wish list of things are. And then you need to understand what you're willing to settle for. So the first place to start is to think about the type of fleet that you're running. If you're just running cars and light commercials, then the process is fairly easy. There's a whole range of suppliers that will be able to help you out. If you're running cars and trucks, then it's getting a little more complicated because not all retailers can handle cars and trucks. Well, they might be able to handle cars and small trucks, but they can't do light trucks. So it really will depend on what type of fleet or vehicles you have in the fleet. Now, if you're running cars, trucks and plant, then you're getting very sophisticated, and you're really going to have to work with the supplier to make sure their capabilities can handle all three asset types, because there are very few suppliers that are able to do three different asset types well in the tyre industry. Once you've thought about that, then you can think about the location of your fleet. Is it local? Do you operate across a couple of suburbs like a council does? Or is it centralised, where you're operating maybe across a couple of different regions or a couple of different states, but they come back to the office regularly or the warehouse regularly? Could be a service fleet, could be a delivery fleet, logistics, or it could just be the sales team. They all come in on a Monday. The third type is a national fleet, where the vehicles are everywhere. Whether they're salespeople or service people, they're just out and about, and whenever they need tyres, they could be in any location. If you're running a local fleet, then you can talk directly to the retailers in the area, selling the brand of tyre you need. To benchmark them on price, you can check online. All of the national retailers display online pricing these days, so it's very easy to work out whether you're paying a competitive price or not. If the fleet is centralised or a national fleet, then you probably should start talking to the head office of a national retailer so you can get an account with one bill and the drivers can access multiple locations. Now, if you go back to your fleet and you look at the brands of tyres that are fitted as OE, there is normally one main brand, and if you have a standardised vehicle policy with one manufacturer, then each model will probably have a similar brand. So you can rule out suppliers that don't sell this brand as their first preference. Now, all suppliers can get access to most brands, but if they don't have it as their top one or two brands, then it means they won't be carrying it in stock when you need it. For example, in the old days, Holden used to fit Bridgestone at the factory, and Ford fitted Dunlop. So Holden fleets would use Bridgestone as a tyre supplier, and Ford fleets would use Bow Repairs. It was pretty simple. If you need to go through a tender process, at least you've narrowed down the potential candidates and can reduce the number of companies involved based on what's fitted as OE and where your fleet operates. Evaluating pricing submissions is a separate presentation. There are many different ways to price a tyre. The lines between consumer and fleet have blurred, and the industry doesn't publish a recommended retail to use as a benchmark. I'm sure there's a lot of learnings in a group like this, and I would encourage you to network with each other and other IPWEA fleet members to share some tips on price negotiations for tyres. Now with trucks, the brand isn't as critical as with passenger and light commercial tyres. With fleet assets, the choices can be limited, and it's often based on price. Service levels are more important when selecting a good tyre supplier for trucks and plant. Some other things to consider: on-site or off-site service, tyre maintenance plans, flexibility to provide service when the assets aren't being used, and breakdowns. These are all important for fleets that are operating trucks and plant compared to fleets that are operating cars and light commercial vehicles. Here's what a supplier evaluation matrix may look like when you're looking at tyres. The criteria will be different depending on the asset mix of your fleet. With a mixed fleet, it might be more practical to have two specialised suppliers rather than trying to get one to do everything. In this example, supplier B would be better for passenger and light commercial vehicles, while supplier C would be better for trucks and plant. I think my head's hiding the supplier C column there. While I was working at Hancock and Bridgestone, I found that retailers of passenger and light commercial tyres generally weren't equipped to provide services to trucks and plants, and truck tyre specialists generally weren't equipped to service passenger car tyres. Obviously, both would say yes if you offered to buy from them, though eventually the service levels would be impacting and the supplier relationship would deteriorate. I hope this overview has been helpful. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, tyres are not something people think about regularly, so their importance to a fleet can get overlooked. And because they look the same, negotiations with suppliers can get stuck on price rather than on brands and service. Okay, let's look at the information that I've covered today, and now might be a good time to ask some questions, or think about the questions we want to ask offline, if that's the best way to do it. So first off, top 5 tyre tips. Then I looked at tyre technology. We talked about all-terrain tyres, and I showed some examples between two different popular patterns and what the benefits of each one were. I talked about tyre compounds, and I'm specifically focused on carbon black and silica-based compounds, and explained that there's a compromise when choosing and manufacturing tyres. Tyre construction, I gave you an indication of some of the trends that are being introduced to reduce noise and reduce fuel consumption. OE tyre markings, something that fleets don't come across very often, but will become more important over the next decade, especially with electric vehicles. And then we discussed electric vehicles. They are built differently or constructed differently than tyres for petrol and diesel vehicles. And then lastly, I gave you a bit of an indication of what to do when looking at tyre suppliers, and then provided a matrix that can help you identify a supplier to choose, and made the point that the supplier that does your passenger and light commercial vehicles may be different to the supplier that does your trucks based on the service and the other elements that trucks and plants require compared to passenger vehicles. Here's those top 5 tips again. Check tyre pressures monthly. Use a spare tyre to save money. Fit OE tyres or replace with OE fitments. Select the right supplier based on your fleet requirements. And include tyres in your fleet policy. And for those of you that have been inspired by my presentation and want to learn more about tyres and maybe even become a tyre nerd just like me, here's an interview I did with Talking Automotive. It's available on YouTube and Spotify. As I mentioned, I'm passionate and I can get too detailed, so it's a long one, but it's been well received by the industry and can certainly give you a great overview if you're looking at selecting tyre suppliers in the near future. Thanks again. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you're having a great time at the conference. All the best and have a safe 2022.